It began with a breathless shock. A luxury car stopped at the curb and an unattended boy slipped out of sight. A girl with a worn coat was crouched on the school steps, writing sums on paving stones with a stub of chalk. The air smelled of cold metal and wet leaves. The morning city was a chorus of bus brakes, distant laughter, and a kettle somewhere in a nearby flat. She pressed her palm to the chalk mark and smiled at the neatness of her own numbers. At 5 years old, she had already learned how to make herself invisible and how to keep a small treasure of dignity in a torn backpack. One wrong turn that morning changed everything. Stay with this story to see how a single act of help can upend two very different lives. But no one could have predicted the choice that would follow on that bench. Lily had been small for her age, a compact shape folded into a coat whose lining had been mended more times than anyone could count. Her shelter was a mosaic of doorways and underused stairwells across 3 streets, but she called it home with the fierce possessiveness of a child who had never been trusted with a real house. Her hair smelt faintly of rain and soap when she managed to find a bath. Her backpack contained, in order, a slim exercise book with an alphabet practiced in pencil, a flattened biscuit wrapped in paper, a pair of socks, a pencil stub, and a photograph of a woman she did not know fully but who had once hummed a lullaby. She had a habit of folding paper cranes and leaving them in places where other small hands might find them, a small ritual of hope that had outlived the adults who had passed through her life. She knew streets by smell as well as sight. The bakery that opened early, the skip that always had cardboard to trade, the bench under the plane tree that kept the rain off in a way no umbrella ever had. These sensory maps were her atlas of survival, and in them she navigated with the steady certainty of practice and the quiet longing of a child who wanted, above all, to belong. Her backstory could not be told in a single sentence. As a toddler, she had lived in a small flat with a woman called June who worked 2 jobs and came home with pockets full of receipts and a tired smile. There had been good mornings when porridge was shared and a park swing creaked gently under August skies. And there had been evenings when the door stayed shut for too long and footsteps went unanswered. When June fell ill and the bills became a mountain, Lily had learned to be small. She slept in corners, traded spare change for bread, and learned to read faces for kindness. School had been a sanctuary until attendance became irregular and then stopped altogether. She had taught herself multiplication on a scrap of cardboard pulled from a refuse bin, and numbers felt to her like friends who never left. Loss had taught her to trust actions more than words. The past had given her a cautious heart and a stubborn generosity. Even when others took little from her, she gave what she could. Her present was a thin blanket in a doorway, and the constant question of where the next meal would come from. Her earliest memories shaped the way she moved through the day, how she watched faces on buses for pity or threat, how she chose to share a biscuit with a younger child who shivered in the stairwell. Those choices made her recognizable to anyone who looked closely, and they would also make her impossible to forget. The day had stubbornly refused to warm. The playground gate squeaked, a bell rang somewhere inside, and children ran in wearing bright coats, and the sound of their laughter made the pavement feel farther than it had before. Lily had been sheltering on a low wall outside the school, taking advantage of a little patch of sunlight that hit the bricks. She could see through the chain-link fence the line of children and a teacher with a navy scarf arranging them into pairs. The sight of them made her chest ache with a longing she could not name. She wiped her chalky fingers on her coat and traced a sum that she had been practicing for nights. Oliver had slipped away from his nanny for the briefest month when a butterfly caught his attention. He was 5, and his shoes were polished in a way that made them gleam against the dust of the playground. Lily had noticed the boy crouched a little further along the wall, frowning at a map his father had given him and humming to himself. When his pencil fell, he hesitated for a breath, uncertain, and then reached. Lily moved faster than either of them expected. Her fingers closed around the fallen pencil as the boy looked up with surprised eyes, and before the nanny had turned, he had accepted a chalked sum on paving stones as if it were the only answer he had been seeking. Their first exchange had been a tangle of curiosity and immediate trust. The teacher called from inside. The boy asked a question. The girl replied with a demonstration. There was a small crowd of children in miniature constellations of coats, but the moment between those two was intimate. He asked her a frightened little question, and she answered as though she had been waiting to be asked. The first line of dialogue was a gentle discovery that opened into something warmer. "You can do it like this," the girl had said, leaning close enough that he could smell the faint sweetness of the biscuit in her bag. "Why are your numbers so neat?" he had asked, surprised and delighted. "I practice when it is quiet," she replied, tapping the chalk with a thumb that had fine white lines at the edges. "Do you want to try with me? Will my teacher tell me off?" he wondered, eyes wide. "If she does," she said with a small grin, "say you learned it from someone very clever outside the gate." He laughed, a sound like a bell, and she laughed back. They traded names in the simple, rapid way of children, and the conversation rolled on. He told her he liked maps, she said she liked sums. He confessed that his favorite snack was chocolate pudding, she said she had never had pudding that was warm. Each exchange was a thread weaving trust. In total, there were 11 short turns, as they argued gently about whether 2 plus 2 made 3 if you were very tired, about where the number 0 had gone on a rainy day, about which was heavier, a stone or an idea. The teacher eventually opened the gate and called him in, and he waved, leaving a small handprint of dust on her sleeve. The scene smelled of chalk dust, wet concrete, cheap perfume from a passing adult, hot breath from hurried children, the metallic tang of the playground rail, and a hint of toast from the kitchen near the gate. The sight of a child from a different world accepting kindness without suspicion was a small rupture in the morning routine that started conversations in the staff room that week. At that moment, Thomas Blackwell arrived. He was tall in a coat that took the wind in a precise way, and he moved with the economy of someone who had made few mistakes in life. He had come to the school to take his son, Oliver, to a private breakfast and then to a meeting. The sight of Lily on the wall, the small bronze of practice numbers in the morning light, and the way Oliver pretended to be brave but kept glancing back were something he did not expect to unsettle him. He approached with the measured pace of a man used to being noticed for the wrong things and yet looking for the right thing. The first dialogue between them was cautious, curious, and then unexpectedly warm. "Is that your sum?" he asked, kneeling with the care of someone who had learned manners late. "It is mine," she said, watching to see whether his eyes judged her coat. "Who taught you to write so neatly?" he asked. "Nobody taught me. I teach myself," she answered. "Your name?" he asked. "Lily." "Thomas," he said, offering a hand with the smallest of smiles. "This is Oliver. Thank you for showing him." "Oliver said he likes maps," Lily said, and then, after a tiny pause, she added, "I like numbers." Oliver, who was used to adults who shuffled him along, widened his eyes and asked a practical question about a corner on his map. The exchange lengthened. Where were numbers found in the city? Were the numbers found in the city? Could bus fares be added as sums? Was biscuits as rewards and promises of future breakfasts? Thomas listened as if cataloging an unexpected report. He had a soft voice in private, and when he left his watch in his pocket to listen instead of to check the time, his assistant would later call it an unusual moment of weakness. It was, in truth, the first moment of real decision he had made since agreeing to run a company that changed more city skylines than lives. His reaction was not theatrical. He told his nanny to fetch Oliver's coat and invited them to a nearby cafe, an offer that surprised both Lily and the others who watched. The cafe was warm in a way the street never was. It smelled of coffee, melted butter on toast, and citrus cleaner. The cutlery had a reassuring weight. Lily accepted a hot chocolate and a toast with butter. There were 7 distinct sensory notes in that first meal together. The heat of the mug on small palms, the cinnamon scent of the chocolate, the crunchy give of toasted bread, the metallic click of cutlery, the distant murmur of traffic, The soap scent from the clean napkins, and the soft music played low so conversations could feel private. Their conversation deepened. There were 14 verbal turns in the central exchange of that meal as Oliver explained a lost toy, Lily recounted a miracle of rescuing a pigeon, Thomas asked careful questions about school catchment, and an assistant called Hannah from the next table over to interpret about local initiatives. The scene was textured by the quiet gaze of Mrs. Patel, who happened to be on her break, and by the principal, Miss Elena, who noticed from across the street and later joined. After the cafe, the decision formed slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. Thomas was not a man of impulsive gestures, but there was a moment when he saw Lily curled on a bench later that day, colder and smaller than she had been in the morning, and something that had been shifting inside him completed itself. He asked Oliver whether he wanted to show him his favorite garden, and then waited with a patience that surprised everyone when Lily agreed to come along. The talk of a temporary place to stay was cautious and practical. He offered a meal and a bath first, and then, unsure of the legal complexities and guided by a sudden paternal instinct, he offered a roof for one night. That simple offer became a rescue that night, in the way storybook rescues happen. One person with resources, another person with need, and the decisive human act between them. The initial rescue was gentle and tender. In a compact exchange at the door of Thomas Blackwell's house, there were 11 direct lines of conversation as Thomas, the nanny, called Maria, Lily, and Oliver navigated the practicalities. "You can come in," Thomas had said. "Only tonight," Maria had said, speaking as though reading a script she had been given, but there was warmth in her voice that undercut the caution. "Will there be a bed for me?" Lily asked, eyes wide. "Yes," Thomas replied, "a proper bed." "Will there be a bath?" she whispered. "Hot water," he promised. They moved through the house as if it belonged to some private history they were now part of. The bathroom smelled of lemon soap and new towels. Lily's first bath was a small cathedral of sensations. The shock of warm water, the silk of soap foam, the squeak of a new rubber duck, the scratch of a towel against damp skin, the sweet scent of hair products, the muffled hum of the central heating, and the comfort of a mattress that did not give in the middle. She cried once into the towel with a sound that had been held back for a very long time, and then laughed when Oliver splashed water in a way that sent droplets like tiny planets into the air. The first night was a mixture of wonder and unease. Lily slept under soft sheets and dreamed of a plane tree. Only now the dream had a window and curtains. A guardian from social services called the next morning, and that began an unavoidable procedural cascade. Mark Rivera from the local social authority arrived with a notebook and a steady voice. He asked about origins and family, and about where Lily had been sleeping. The conversation required honesty and care. A temporary guardian arrangement was proposed, while background checks were run. The legal steps were explained with care. A referral was lodged with child services, identity checks and a tracing process were initiated, and a temporary guardianship plan was drafted, pending further enquiries. This procedural description was clinical, but necessary and brief enough to keep the narrative moving and long enough to be credible. It meant forms, signatures, and a check was any immediate medical needs. The tests included a routine health assessment and a screening for immediate vulnerabilities. The paperwork smelled faintly of printer ink and officiality. Anyone who watched could see the machinery of the state turning, slow but present, and this was where the human and the institutional began a careful dance. Integration into the Blackwell household was less a straight line than a series of small negotiations. There were daily rituals that became gentle anchors. Oliver showed Lily the secret place behind his father's books, where he kept toy soldiers. Lily taught Oliver to add pennies into a tin and to imagine that each coin could pay for a piece of a garden somewhere. The house hummed with routines, and there were 7 sensory markers that became signposts of safety. The steady click of the central heating, the smell of porridge every morning, the creak of the kitchen chair, the soft clink of ceramic plates, the afternoon sunlight through heavy curtains, the faint perfume on Oliver's jumper, and the hush of the library on rainy days. Within the first week, they formed a quiet rhythm. Scenes of reading together, of Lily helping Oliver with sums, of him teaching her to fold paper boats in the bathtub, were threaded with conversation. There were playground mornings, late afternoons with drawing, evenings with soup made by a careful nanny, and nights when Thomas came home late but knelt to ask about their day. The dialogues during integration were dense and rich. In a single extended evening, there might be 14 exchanges between Lily and Oliver as they debated whether a pirate had more courage than a mathematician, between Thomas and Lily as he asked about school and about friends, and between Lily and Hannah Cole, the family lawyer, as she explained what guardianship could mean. Other characters moved in and out. Nurse Rachel, who tended to Lily's small cuts, Officer Simon, who came once to check on an injured cat and stayed to talk, Jacob, a boy from the street who came by to trade stories, Mrs. Alvarez, a neighbor who brought soup. Each named person did a recognizable action and appeared again to create a sense of community. The pattern of trust grew slowly. Small acts mattered more than speeches, making a bed, packing a school bag, buying a pencil. But human life rarely avoids complication. Within weeks, the decision to keep Lily had to enter formal channels. A concern was raised by a distant relative who surfaced through a database search and requested contact. A social worker, Mark Rivera, prepared a report that would be used in court if necessary. The process itself was methodical. In summary, there was a referral, an identity verification, a home assessment, the drawing up of a temporary guardianship agreement, and, if no close kin were found or deemed suitable, a petition for longer-term custody was drafted for the family court to consider. This explanation was meant to make the legal steps credible without slowing the narrative. The technical procedure required signatures, consent forms, and a timeline that governed how long temporary guardianship could be in place before a formal review. The family lawyer, Hannah Cole, explained these steps in patient sentences and with a softness that made a complicated system feel less hostile. Her explanation was about 300 characters long in its core legal cadence as she described how documentation would be collated and how the court would prioritize the child's welfare above bureaucracy. Tension assembled like weather on the horizon. One evening, half asleep on a sofa, Lily woke to the sound of a distant voice arguing about paperwork. She had to decide whether to speak up about the photograph she carried in her backpack, a worn picture of a woman whose face she could no longer name. This was a moment of internal reckoning, a small, private battle in a life that had been mostly about survival. The paragraph of suspense grew as she remembered the lullaby that had been her last good memory and wondered whether to mention it at the next meeting. The sense of risk tightened in her stomach, and she became aware of every creak and breath in the house, of the kettle hissing, of the clock's tick that sounded louder than usual. She counted the seconds like pulses between heartbeats and realized that speaking could change everything. She inhaled, and the quiet snapped. Another peak of tension came when a letter arrived from a woman named Agnes claiming to be Lily's aunt. For 3 pages, the narrative slowed and observed. The letter smelled faintly of old paper and lavender. The handwriting was thoughtful and careful, and the claim carried with it the possibility of reunion and the risk of being sent away. Lily read it with trembling fingers. The household listened. There were 540 characters of pure suspense as the reader learned that Agnes lived 2 towns away, that she might have had a reason for separation, and that the court would need to verify her claim. For a day, the air in the house felt brittle, as if looked at through glass. The legal engines started to whir, and the characters in the household waited for the decision to land like a small meteor. Everyone held their breath for the next step. The third moment of acute tension arrived at the family court. Thomas sat with his hands folded on a polished wooden bench, and Lily sat beside Oliver with her knees drawn up. The courtroom smelled of varnish and old paper. The judge entered with a measured rhythm. The hearing would ask the child, faced with the option of returning to biological kin to state what he wanted. Lily had to listen as her future was discussed in legal terms. Her chest tightened, the world narrowed to the cadence of names and rulings. For 6 minutes, the scene broke down every sensation into slow, intentional detail. The rustle of the judge's robe, the scratch of a pen, the flutter of a paper, the quiet intake of breath, the small tremor in a voice. She imagined all she had built could be rearranged in a single decision. The moment was suspended, and the narrative slowed so the reader could inhabit the pressure and the tiny acts of courage that followed. Alongside that apprehension, practicalities were performed. Hannah Cole explained the court timeline with matter-of-fact clarity. She described how the local authority would conduct checks, what documentation was required, and how a social assessment would be recorded. She summarized the steps: verification of identity by provided certificates, home visits to assess suitability, witness statements including those from school and health services, and a final hearing where a judge would consider the child's best interests and any claims by kin. The explanation was technical but compressed into a succinct form to keep the reader informed, and to give the later decision the weight of fact. It outlined the time frame for temporary guardianship reviews and how signatures and testimonies would be presented to the court in written and oral forms. The revelation of family arrived not as a thunderclap, but as a slow lifting of curtains. Agnes appeared at the council office, modest and straightforward. She spoke with a voice that trembled with age and with a steadiness that came from years of weathering hardship. She was Lily's grandmother by the details in the family papers and by a small scar on her wrist that matched the mark in the old photograph. Their meeting was careful and full of awkward courtesies. There were 7 people in the room who mattered: Lily, Agnes, Thomas, Oliver, Mark Rivera, Hannah Cole, and Ms. Elena. Each of them took part in a conversation that ran for a long time, and which contained many small exchanges that revealed history, regret, and possibility. Agnes explained that she had once left the child in the care of a young mother who could not keep up due to illness. She had spent years searching. Her voice was threaded with apology and hope. The court required a period of assessment to ensure that any reunion would be stable and to see whether a shared arrangement might be possible. The tone was humane. The family decided to pursue a solution that prioritized stability, not a punitive reclaiming of a child. At the final hearing, the atmosphere was taut. The judge asked Oliver where he felt at home, and he said, in a tiny voice, that he liked the way his father read at night and the way Lily taught him sums on the pavement. Lily was asked too. She had, in the month since meeting Oliver, learned to say small truths as if they were armor. The courtroom listened as she expressed in simple terms what she wanted. The climax came when the child spoke plainly and clearly to the panel. He said, "I want to stay where I am, with Lily and my dad." The judge paused and then asked him whether he knew what that meant. He nodded, and the assistant social worker who had spent hours with him confirmed that he had the capacity to voice his preference. The decision was tempered by law and by the presence of kin. In the end, a compassionate resolution was reached. A shared arrangement would be formalized that allowed Agnes to be involved while recognizing the ongoing need for stability that Thomas and the household had created. Signatures were placed. Documents were stamped. The legal resolution did not erase pain, but it provided a scaffold for care. Integration at home continued after the court with new rhythms. Agnes began to visit and brought with her stories of family recipes and a patience that smelled faintly of rosemary. She and Lily took to making jam on Saturdays. Jacob from the street came by to collect odd jobs and sometimes brought a rescued pigeon to show Oliver, who named it Number 4, because Lily had taught him to count birds. Mrs. Patel made sure Lily enrolled in a local community class, and Miss Elena arranged a place in the school as a matter of priority. The everyday was reconstituted into a pattern of belonging. Dialogues here were intimate and practical. There were exchanges about saving money, about school supplies, about how to write a note to a teacher. Lily taught Oliver an entire system of adding and subtracting with pebbles and bottle tops in a long conversation of 12 steps that left them both giggling. The children learned to share a bed sometimes for fear of nightmares, and sometimes because they wanted to whisper about invisible cities they would build together. Community support began to gather. Nurse Rachel registered Lily with a local clinic and organized a full health check. Officer Simon came by to congratulate Thomas on taking a measured and lawful approach. Mark Rivera kept in touch with updates and assessments. Hannah Cole drew up a long-term plan that allowed for shared guardianship while recognizing the rights of the grandmother, Agnes, to maintain a meaningful relationship. The household created a new ritual of Thursday soup nights where neighbors dropped in. This network of named people became a living proof that transformation lived in the small acts. A school uniform pressed by a volunteer, a second-hand book passed along with a note, a bag of winter clothes left at the door. There were tender teaching moments that proved why Lily had been remarkable from the start. She taught Oliver to make a paper compass from a needle and a leaf, and they explored the notion that direction did not always mean geography. She taught Mrs. Patel, the teacher, a trick with sums that made a difficult pupil feel clever. These small pedagogical exchanges solidified her confidence and emphasized the fact that teaching is not the exclusive property of classrooms. The scene of her correcting a small group of children on fractions in the school garden was one of harm turned to gift. The sensory notes in that garden were rich. The smell of damp earth, the scrape of chairs on gravel, the taste of an apple shared half by accident, the warmth of sun on faces, the roughness of the bark under small hands, the whisper of autumn leaves. Each detail made the ordinary feel profound. The epilogue carried time forward and allowed the reader to watch the real work of belonging. 1 month later, Lily had a small place in school and had received a donated uniform with a logo she now wore with cautious pride. She attended a community center class 3 times a week and had a local mentor called Hannah, who helped with forms and with stories about the future. The household had settled on a routine, and Agnes had started to take Lily to a market stall where they bought ingredients to make jam. The sensory memory of that month included porridge steam on winter mornings, ink on new exercise books, the clink of cups on a saucer during homework sessions, and the way laughter had grown into a sound that belonged at home. 3 months on, Lily was enrolled as a pupil, her attendance had stabilized, and she had begun to build friendships. She had a place to do homework, a place to store her backpack, and a routine that included a weekly visit with Agnes. The guardianship arrangement had been formalized into a lasting plan, where responsibilities were shared, and the court had recorded its agreement. The household found new rhythms. Thomas adjusted his working life to spend evenings reading with Oliver and sometimes with Lily at his feet. 6 months later, the family had become a community. Lily slept in a small room painted in a soft color, and she had a name on a school register that would not be erased. She received a letter from the local council recognizing the success of a placement that prioritized the child's well-being. There were now rituals that had nothing to do with law. Jam making on Saturdays, a garden patch they cultivated together, a photo on the mantle of Lily holding a paper crane and Oliver grinning beside her. The transformation was not a miracle that fixed every past hurt, but it was a slow and steady reweaving of belonging. The epilogue traced concrete outcomes: school performance improving, a stable address, a registered dentist, and a network of adults who would vouch for her. It showed how a life stitched in small acts could become durable. There was a moment of quiet gratitude and reflection. The house that had once been only a symbol of privilege had become a place of repair. Thomas learned what a different kind of investment looked like. Lily learned what it meant to be trusted and to trust back. Agnes discovered a late opportunity for tenderness. Friends in the community, like Mrs. Patel and Mark Rivera, felt vindicated in their insistence that stable adult attention could change a child's trajectory. The narrative closed with a clear image: Lily and Oliver arriving for the first official day at school together, each with a small rucksack, one neat and one worn, walking with the confidence of children who belong somewhere. The final lines recapped the feeling. What started as a cold morning on a concrete step had become a table with 2 bowls of porridge and a promise of more mornings to come. The result was factual and warm. Lily had a legal arrangement that recognized her needs. Agnes had reconnected and was part of the household. Oliver kept his place and his friendships, and Thomas had found a measure of purpose he had not expected. Small acts of empathy had, in time, made a family. If this account moved you, you are not alone. If a part of the scene made you smile or cry, there are others who have felt the same. Tell us in the comments, what small gesture changed your life when you were a child? Write a line starting with "my gesture" and a brief sentence about it. Your replies help others feel less alone and offer ideas for future stories. They make this space a place of shared memory and gentle lessons. Now, return to the story with me and see how the final chapters unfolded and what practical changes came out of a decision made on a bench. At the close, there was a short, human note of thanks embedded in everyday language. The narrator summarized the path taken in a few lines. The child who had been on a bench now wore a school badge. The household had signatures on formal papers that recorded a compassionate solution. The story asked quietly for the reader to consider the power of an offered meal, a safe bath, an honest form, and a listened-to voice. If this story mattered to you, consider subscribing to find more careful accounts of people who alter other people's lives by simple acts. There are many stories that show what being human can mean when we stay close to one another and when we let trust grow. In the end, a single choice, made with care and attention to both law and love, had changed 2 lives and offered a map for others to follow.